You're listening to State of Identity, an open discussion on the present and future technologies, companies, people, and paradigms that define who we are in the modern world and how the world defines us. On today's show, a topic that is first to mind for many of us when discussing identity, the government. With apologies to Ira Glass, stay with us.
State of Identity is brought to you by the No Identity Conference, convening the world's most influential organizations and smartest minds in finance, tech, and government to shape the future of identity. May 15th to 17th, 2017 in Washington, D.C. Visit oneworldidentity.com for details.
Welcome everyone to State of Identity, recording from several dozen feet above the streets of New York. I'm your host, One World Identity Director of News and Media, Cameron D'Ambrosi. Whether it's opening a bank account, boarding a plane, or applying for a job, a government-issued ID is often relied upon to prove one's identity. However, as we move into an increasingly digital world, the government's place in defining our identities may be changing. Joining us all the way from Tel Aviv to discuss these issues, Ron Atzmon, Managing Director at AU10TIX, a secure customer onboarding vendor for clients such as Google, PayPal, and governments across the globe. Welcome to the podcast, Ron.
Good afternoon, good evening, whatever you are.
Also joining us from the swamps of Washington, D.C., Peter Joukov, currently a business development manager at One World Identity. Peter previously consulted with the Department of Defense and Pentagon on identity and access management strategies and cybersecurity issues. Welcome to the podcast, Pete.
Thanks for having me, Cameron. I would beg to differ on the swamps of D.C., but we can get into that later.
All right, I guess we'll save that for a separate episode.
Yeah, there we go.
So in jumping right into it, I mentioned this in the introduction to the podcast. I think government-issued identification documents are perhaps the first thing that comes to mind for the average consumer when the topic of identity comes up, that a government-maintained identity is kind of the singular identity that many people identify with. How do both of you see the government's role in defining identity changing as we move towards an increasingly digital world?
So basically the governments, if we like it or not, they call the shots. So we're actually quite dependent on whatever they decide to do with it. If they want to be more forward-thinking, flexible, innovative, they can do that. If they're willing to be more like old school, we're basically in the mercy of their hands, to be honest. So unfortunately, they are the executor for good and for worse.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting in the U.S. too is each of the states kind of has a different minimum requirement for their proofing and vetting and verification for issuing their state driver's licenses. So from the federal perspective, it's hard to know which state's driver's license or physical identification card can be used for receiving different types of benefits because they have that different background verification process. So it comes to a matter of how much can you trust all the work put into issuing a certain identification card. And I think also when you start moving towards digital online identities, can you use that card for both physical things and then also maybe as a card to access things online?
So Ron, your company deals a lot with government users of your identity verification and onboarding technologies. Can you speak a little bit to the regulatory response to the adoption of what you refer to as the second generation of compliance processing technology?
Well, to be honest, we are very much involved when it comes to the airport environment. Unfortunately, we don't deal a lot, on the so that's the most interaction we have with the government from that point of view, because when it comes because there's a standard, a global standard, basically, when it comes to passports, as my other respected colleague here as well said. Because, like, say, in the U.S., there are there are 50 different states, and everybody has their own rules. It goes the same also for Europe. I mean, like, it's a bit limited. From a business point of view, it's for a company like us, it's very, very problematic to deal with them on a specific base, especially when there's no one federal government that decides on the rules from it. But when it comes to the second generation, governments are starting to look at it. But I would say, there not a lot of it is happening because nobody wants to do any changes, and only if there's a strong leadership in one of these governments, then they start thinking a bit differently. Like what you see, for example, in the let's take I have probably finding an example in the U.S., but I can tell you two extreme examples: one for the good, one for the worse. So you can look at the UK, where the UK government decided to become more forward-thinking and how we can deal with, just second-generation identity. And they're trying to open their minds and test different stuff. So this is example number one. And you take the other example on the other side, which is the German government. They're like very, very, very old school, data privacy, you can't do anything. And you know what? There's not even, digital identity. You want to get. I'll give you an example. You want to go to open a bank account online. You can't do this. You need to go to the post office, and they need to authenticate that the user that you've asked to get is you, and you are the guy with the document, so they can enable you online banking. So just to give you a bit of a perspective, how backwards is the German market, as an example.
That's fascinating. And at the post office, are they performing any sort of digital authentication of the documents, or is it a postal clerk holding a passport photo up next to a customer's face and saying, "Oh yeah, that looks like you"? If
they're advanced, they're using scanner-based solutions that are used in airports, but in that respect, but so I've seen the scanners, but I wouldn't be surprised, okay, if they might also be doing this manually, to be honest. I've been around for so many years in this industry, already like more than 8. I've seen everything. So, but I think it's now scanner-based solution. So they authenticate the document with a scanner solution, and then they look at you, and then they say, okay, yeah, that's this is authentic passport, and this is the guy that owns it. So they do like what it's called in the jargon of the industry, anti-impersonation check, making sure that the guy that submitted the document is the guy that it's the same guy. But people they gain weight, they lost weight, they add beards. Beards now became very trendy.
They lose hair, like me.
They lose hair, they gain hair. You get everything. So, yeah. So it is still a human being that is in this equation, and for good and for worse.
So, would you say a human being in the equation? If when they're manually doing it, is it really a person's judgment call of like, oh, this guy is the same person, he just gained weight or lost weight? Is that where the judgment human?
Yes.
Okay.
There's no, as far as I know, they don't do any automated face compare. But to be honest, I haven't looked into this issue for the last 12 to 18 months. But I can tell you, if they would have done this, it would have created lots of traction. So I'm assuming that it's still based on the person.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, Cameron, I've only seen from the U.S. perspective, so it's interesting to see like over in Europe, still different standards, and really, like Ron was saying, really it has to be the vendors, it has to be the consumers or citizens, and also it has to be the government regulators and lawmakers all working together, because you can't have just the government set these standards and nobody follow them, or vice versa. You can't have a vendor develop a solution that nobody's going to buy. So it's a tough nut to crack just to kind of move forward in this space.
Yeah, and nobody wants to take a decision, to be honest.
Yeah.
Besides the UK, and I want to give the credit to the UK government. Okay, when David Cameron became the prime minister, he said, okay, I want to make the UK the hub for the financial services, and he said, okay, regulators, work with me. Okay, so he didn't let the regulators dictate. I'm also from dictatorship, but he gave the this is the spirit of the of the leader, and please, the regulators, work with me. And this is why you see London as London is at the moment the FinTech hub of the world, and also Germany has the potential. But the problem in Germany is that the regulators are not helping them for this industry to become a power. And although there's lots of talent in Germany, but they're just killing their own industry in that respect. So I think, plus I think from a regulation point of view, unlike in the U.S., if you're regulated by the FSA, for example, which is the UK, it's good enough for Europe, okay, across the board. Unfortunately, this is not the same in the States. So if you're regulated by New York regulators, for example, doesn't mean you can do banking services in California or in DC or in Florida. So in that respect, I think if you're asking me why the U.S. industry from a financial point of view hasn't been skyrocketing like Europe, is because the inherent problems, when it comes to standard for authentication.
I think that's a great point about the fragmentation. And I think there's a lot of parallels that can be drawn between the challenges of adopting next generation IDs at the state level are born out that way as well, because there's been a federal push for a longer time to establish some sort of national, more secure standards for identity verification. The problem is it's like herding cats to get all 50 states to agree to a shared standard.
Yeah, and just a shout out to the people doing that. There's a federal level initiative that's been out for a while, National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace. They're kind of trying to lead both different federal organizations, but also states and citizens in a direction to have those online digital identities and make sure citizens can realize their benefits through that process. So I think the next few years will be very exciting to see what the states do. And how the federal government tries to organize that fragmented market that you described.
I think that's a great segue you just came up with to move to our next topic, which is the interface between biometrics, current generation physical identification documents, and as we move into the future, digital identity. How do you believe that this move towards biometric and digital identification will impact the continued issuance of physical identification documents such as driver's licenses, government photo IDs, and passports?
So from my perspective, I don't like to try and box my own thinking into a certain direction of biometrics is the only answer, or cards are the only, or whatever. I think the market will help dictate which one is best, and it could be a combination of them. It could work one in one instance, another in a different situation. So I'm all for seeing how biometrics can help and work, and whether we keep the card and somehow there are biometrics on there to help authenticate you to the card, and the card gets you access to something. I think it's still to be determined, but I'm all for trying out biometrics and using it. Why not?
Well, I think that biometrics is definitely, I'm all for it. I can tell you, there's I'll tell you a small use case of what's going on in Israel. So in Israel, they're doing biometrics identity. So you get this new smart card like you have in Europe with a chip inside, and I'm gonna bash my government, okay? But it's not just it's not an issue of say a Republican or Democrat. It's across the board problem. It started by. So the problem is, and that's it's sheer know if it's stupidity or just recklessness, but in the pilot that they've done, when you want to apply for a biometric identity they call it the new ID card. They will take from you a picture of your face plus 2 fingerprints. Okay, now until you hear this last stuff, they keep besides embedding the fingerprints and the picture of your face in the chip, which is encrypted, they will also now keep it on a centralized database.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's a bit freaky because everybody knows everything is hackable.
Yep.
So let's and there's a big problem, and there's a big talk about it in Israel. That it's irresponsible because think about that they hacked into the government and they stole your fingerprints. Now let me tell you just a simple story. Someone went and killed someone, okay, and they stole your fingerprints and they implanted on the weapon. But you're innocent. What are you going to do now? Like delete your fingerprints, like you delete a credit card? They don't understand how dangerous. But that's because I would say it's a combination of a few problems that we have in Israel. Part of it is just people that are just don't aware how dangerous stuff is and how easy it is to steal. I'm not against, putting the fingerprints on your personal card, but having it in a central database, if you're not a criminal, then why should the government have your fingerprints? For no good reason, especially when you see everything is hackable. You can buy anything if you want on the dark web. It's that easy. So I would go and say, I'm all for biometrics. I would drop finger biometrics. I would go to face biometrics, which is good to a certain extent. And also iris, I would say iris is relatively, copying your iris is a bit more complicated. I would say it's relatively a secure method. So I'm all for iris. I'm all for face. I'm definitely against fingerprints.
The whole privacy part too, in a centralized place. That's. I definitely think privacy folks have a huge say in all these regulations and things, whichever direction the market ends up going. Totally agree with you.
I think that's one of the age-old debates that will continue to be debated, especially in this coming era of increasing movement towards internet everything, is what is the trade-off between privacy versus security? Is that a false dichotomy? And if it's not, at what level do you take the trade-offs? What are your thoughts on whether there is a privacy versus security trade-off that must be undertaken, or if you think that's just a canard?
So, I think you and I have talked about this before, Cameron, and in my opinion, it's probably going to be more or less determined through trial and error. We see through some social media, things that we use, people hand away their information. They don't care. They're like, whatever. They don't think about the repercussions that Ron had talked about of having a centralized place that things are stored. They're just all about the ease of use for whatever they want to do. And I think it's really going to take those consumers and citizens to stop and cry out and say, oh, okay, I was cool giving away all this stuff to get these things up to a point, but now what I get in return is not worth how much of myself I'm giving away and exposing to other people.
I think you're definitely right. Listen, I've been in the internet industry for more than 20 years now. So, in the early days, remember, social media wasn't Facebook, was like forums and posts and MIRC, where you were pure anonymous people, or BBSs, where people really didn't know who you are. And suddenly Facebook came. And I'm not sure it's Facebook that created this. I think, it's the issue of, this trend, the psychological trend of, getting, virtually naked. Not naked body-wise, but,
Thankfully.
But, everything is out. People share. They share what they do. They share where they go. They share. It's crazy. It's and I think, so I think we are now at the moment where, I would say like 10, 11, 12 years ago, being, I remember this cartoon of, that there's a dog working on the computer, like, chatting with someone else, and nobody knows he's a dog. It's very one of the old cartoons.
Yep.
So I think, the issue of privacy was super strong, 12, 13, 14 years ago. And now it went, to the other side, totally to the other side. I think, once we'll grow up from this, virtual nakedness.
So I think that brings us about to a close here on State of Identity. Thank you so much to Ron and Peter for joining us, and we look forward to speaking with you guys again soon.
Yep. Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much for your time, and same for you. Thank you, Peter, as well.
Thanks, Ron. Yep. See you guys.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please visit us on iTunes and leave us a review, or visit us online at www.oneworldidentity.com.